In New York, they say, a reputation is built over decades, but ruined over breakfast at the Hotel Pierre. My breakfast consisted of cold black coffee and the front page of the New York Post. Arthur, my second husband, whom I thought defeated, struck not at my accounts but at something more valuable than money, my name. He didn't just file a lawsuit. He bought the silence of the right people and then spoke up himself. The headlines screamed, "Manhattan's Black Widow," how Eleanor Vance forged signatures and ruined husbands. It was a lie. But in the world of big real estate, the lies that bankers believe become the truth. In 1 week, my world turned to ashes. Account freeze. My primary lender, Chase Manhattan, withdrew all financing lines. Construction on my flagship project on 42nd Street was stalled. Boycott. People who yesterday were dreaming of being invited to my dinner now crossed the street at the sight of my limo. Marcus's betrayal. That same Marcus, my lover and accomplice, was the first to withdraw his assets from our mutual deals. "Nothing personal, Nora. You've become toxic," he said, without even looking me in the eye. Bankruptcy didn't come overnight. It crept up slowly, taking first the penthouse, then the art collection, and finally my last Rolls-Royce. I remember the day the bailiffs sealed the doors of my office. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching only one folder, the documents for that same old sewing shop in Ohio I'd once forgotten to sell. I was left with nothing. I didn't even have enough money for a decent hotel. At 45, I found myself back where I started, alone, penniless, in a cheap motel room in Queens that smelled of mold and hopelessness. Arthur was celebrating his victory. He'd ruined me completely, turning the queen of real estate into a laughingstock. But he'd made one fatal mistake. He'd left me angry, and an angry woman with a cold mind is the most dangerous predator in the Manhattan jungle. I looked at my reflection in the cracked motel mirror and whispered, "They think I'm broke, but a bankrupt is someone who's given up." I'm just taking inventory of my enemies. It wasn't just a financial death. It was a public execution. In New York in the 80s, you could be forgiven for murder if you had a good lawyer, but you were never forgiven for being an ex. The room in Queens cost $40 a night. The mustard-colored wallpaper was peeling from the damp, and the only view from the window was of a blank brick fence and trash cans. I sat on the edge of the bed where thousands of broken people had slept before me, looking at my hands. A light streak remained on my ring finger, the mark of the 5-carat ring that the bailiffs had snatched from me right in the hallway of my office. Arthur White didn't just take my money. He poisoned the very soil I walked on. His press campaign was brilliant. He portrayed me not just as a fraud, but as an unstable woman. And in the world of big money, unstable is a death sentence. For the first 3 days, I just lay there. I didn't cry. I didn't have the extra moisture in my body for that. I counted the cracks in the ceiling. There were 47 of them. On the 48th, I realized, if I didn't get up now, I'd become one of those shadows who live out their days in cheap bars, telling random drinking buddies how great they once were. I opened my only folder, a sewing workshop in Ohio, a rotten building in a town where the only entertainment was watching tractors rust. This was my last asset, my back door. Oh, okay, Arthur, I whispered into the empty room. You wanted to return me to the mud. Let's see if you get dirty yourself when I start crawling out of it. Back to basics, I returned to Ohio on a bus. The ride seemed to last forever. I stared out the window at the endless cornfields and thought about the irony of fate. I left in a silk dress, dreaming of skyscrapers, and returned in a shabby raincoat, dreaming of revenge. The workshop was in terrible condition. The roof was leaking, the windows were boarded up. But when I walked inside, I smelled something. The smell of dust and machine oil. That same smell from my childhood. The town didn't recognize me. To them, I was just a city girl who hadn't made it. I hired 2 local guys to clear out the trash and picked up a phone book. I had no capital, but I still had my brain. I knew the New York real estate market better than the back of my hand. And I knew one secret. Arthur White was planning a massive development in Brooklyn on the site of some old warehouses. He thought I was ruined and couldn't stop him, but he forgot that I knew who really owned the land beneath those warehouses. It was a series of offshore companies, the ends of which led to my first husband, James, that same quiet guy I left for Callahan. A party in the shadows I found James. He hadn't become a millionaire, but he had become a respected lawyer in a small town in Pennsylvania. When he saw me at his door, aged, but still with that predatory glint in my eyes, he didn't slam the door. "Nora," he said, "I've read the papers. You look like someone who's about to blow up the city. James, I don't want your pity. I want your offshore accounts," I replied bluntly. We talked all night. I explained the scheme to him. Arthur desperately needed those warehouses to close the deal of his life. If he didn't get them, his credit cards would go up in smoke. I offered James a deal. He'd hand over the management of the offshore companies to me, and I'd make him fabulously rich, while simultaneously wiping Arthur off the face of the earth. "Why should I believe you?" he asked. "Because I'm the only one who knows how much Arthur fears you. You're his one weak spot, the one he's forgotten." I returned to New York 6 months later, but I didn't go to Park Avenue. I rented a tiny office in Brooklyn, right across from those warehouses. I changed my name. I was now Mrs. E.W. Smith, a representative of a mysterious investment fund. I began to strangle Arthur. Every time he tried to negotiate a land purchase, my fund would outbid him or create legal red tape. I knew all his moves. I knew which lawyers he trusted and what bribes he paid. Arthur began to get nervous. His investors demanded results. His company's stock began to plummet. His reputation as an infallible tycoon began to crumble. One evening, a man walked into my modest office. It was Marcus, the traitor. Nora, I knew it was you, he said, looking around the shabby walls. No one else could have tightened the noose around White's neck so gracefully. Get out of here, Marcus, I said calmly, not looking up from the blueprints. Wait, I have information. Arthur is on the brink. He mortgaged his penthouse and his personal collection to cover the losses. If you strike now, he won't get up. I looked at him. Marcus was a rat who always ran to the strongest ship. And now that ship was me again. The price of your information? I asked. Just let me be there when you return to the throne. A place by my side is worth a lot, Marcus. More than you can afford. The denouement came in the city council chamber. Arthur was certain he'd get the building permit today. He stood at the podium, looking older, with bags under his eyes, but still wearing an expensive suit. When it was time for objections, I entered the chamber. I was wearing the same raincoat I'd returned to Ohio in, but underneath an impeccable Chanel suit, bought with the last of my money from my first successful speculation in Brooklyn. The chamber fell silent. Arthur turned pale. His hands trembled. Eleanor, he breathed. Mr. White, I said, my voice like the crack of a whip. I am here to present evidence that your financial guarantees are a sham. And I am here to declare the land you stand on no longer belongs to you. I placed the documents on the table. James had transferred full rights to me. I was the owner of the land. I was the owner of his debts. I was his nightmare. A month later, Arthur White declared bankruptcy. His reputation wasn't just ruined, it was annihilated. The newspapers that had once hounded me now relished the details of his downfall. I stood on the balcony of my new penthouse, the very same one that had once belonged to Arthur. I had bought it at auction for next to nothing. The city lay at my feet, ablaze with lights. I was rich again, but now I was different. I knew the value of every brick and every smile. My assistant approached me. Miss Vance, your son is here. He says you promised him a meeting. I turned slowly. My son. The fruit of my greatest mistake and my most carefully guarded secret. He looked like his father, the very Callahan who started it all. Let him in, I said. It's time to teach him how to really build an empire. I looked at the New York skyline. Bankruptcy hadn't broken me. It had made me immortal, because now I knew you can take a woman's money, her houses, and her name, but you can't take away her will if she's decided this world is hers.